A 4-year-old woman attending a late-night professional meetup vanished after leaving her downtown office building in Chicago in 2019. Police suggested she simply walked away, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no crime scene. But that theory collapsed when her phone, bank accounts, and social media all went silent at the same moment. For 3 years there were no leads, no sightings, no answers. Then, during a routine renovation of an abandoned corporate facility, a janitor found something wedged behind a locked door. It was her security badge swiped months after she disappeared. The night began like hundreds before it, quiet, unremarkable, and utterly forgettable. The kind of night no one ever expects to become a timestamp in a police report. She checked her reflection in the darkened glass of the office building lobby, smoothing the front of her coat as the city hummed faintly outside. It was just past 9:30 p.m. The networking mixer upstairs had ended early, dissolving into polite goodbyes and half-promises to stay in touch. Nothing dramatic, nothing strange, just another professional obligation checked off a long list of ambitions. Earlier that evening, she'd hesitated before going at all. "You don't have to," her coworker, Maya, had said, leaning against a cubicle wall. "It's late, and these things are always awkward." She'd smiled, slipping her phone into her bag. "I know, but if I don't show up, I'll always wonder what I missed." That was who she was, careful, but forward-moving, someone who believed that momentum mattered. Witnesses later recalled seeing her laugh softly during introductions, nodding attentively as a man across the table described a startup opportunity. It was her first meeting with him, brief, professional, and according to everyone present, completely uneventful. No argument, no discomfort, no reason to remember it. By 9:12 p.m., she texted her sister, "Heading out now. Long day. Call you tomorrow." That message would become a line. Investigators returned to again and again ordinary words frozen in time. Security footage showed her entering the elevator alone, shoulders relaxed, eyes on her phone as the doors slid shut. The elevator descended smoothly, floor by floor, until it opened onto the ground-level lobby. She stepped out, heels clicking softly against polished tile, and walked toward the exit. And that's where the certainty ended. No camera captured her leaving the building. At first, no one noticed. Why would they? She was an adult, independent, capable. When she didn't answer calls the next morning, it was chalked up to exhaustion. When she didn't show up for work, concern flickered but not yet panic. By evening, her sister was standing in her apartment, staring at a neatly made bed and a phone charger still plugged into the wall. "She never goes anywhere without her phone," she whispered. Police were contacted just after midnight. The responding officer scanned the apartment, noting the absence of forced entry, the wallet still on the counter, keys resting in their dish. Everything looked paused, as if she'd stepped out for a moment and simply forgotten to return. Back at the office building, security pulled the footage. "She came down," the guard said, rewinding the tape. "See? Elevator at 9:34. "Where's the exit shot?" the detective asked. The guard frowned. "That's it." They watched again. And again. No grainy figure pushing through glass doors. No reflection. No shadow slipping into the night. "She didn't leave," the detective muttered. Or at least, she didn't leave in any way the cameras could see. As the hours ticked by, a quiet, creeping truth settled over the investigation. The last confirmed sighting of her wasn't on a sidewalk or street corner, but inside a building designed to record every movement. And yet, somehow, she had vanished without triggering a single alarm. The lobby lights buzzed softly in the footage, illuminating an empty space where a woman should have been walking out into the city, unaware that this ordinary night was about to become a mystery no one could explain. By morning, the silence had turned sharp. Her phone rang unanswered again and again, vibrating uselessly on a kitchen counter miles away. By 8:45 a.m., her manager was checking his watch. By 9:10, her desk was still empty. By noon, the quiet absence had become impossible to explain away. Her sister, Elena, sat in her car outside the office building, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She stared up at the glass facade, replaying the last conversation they'd had less than 12 hours earlier. "You sure you're okay getting home this late?" Elena had asked on the phone. "I'm fine," she'd laughed. "It's literally one building, elevator down, street out, Uber home. I'll talk to you tomorrow." Those were the last words anyone heard from her. Detectives arrived just after lunch, moving with the practiced calm of people trained not to assume the worst too quickly. They started with the basics: phone records, credit cards, transit logs. The results were immediate and unsettling. Her bank account showed no activity after 9:16 p.m. No ride-share pickup, no transit card swipe, no calls, no texts, no data usage. "It's like the phone just went dark," the tech officer said, scrolling through logs. "Powered off?" Elena asked. The officer hesitated. "No shutdown command, no battery drain. It just stopped communicating with the network." Inside the office building, security replayed the footage again, frame by frame. They traced her movement from the conference room to the elevator, from the elevator to the lobby. Then nothing. "Could she have gone out a side exit?" one detective asked. The guard shook his head. "All exits feed into the same camera loop, fire doors included." They checked stairwells, empty, storage rooms, locked, restrooms, cleaned overnight, no reports of anything unusual. By evening, the official timeline was reduced to a single, terrifying sentence. "Last confirmed location, ground floor lobby." Elena watched as officers bagged copies of security footage and left the apartment with polite assurances. "She's an adult," one detective said gently. "People do leave. Sometimes they just go." Elena didn't respond. She was staring at her sister's phone charger, still plugged in, cord neatly coiled like it was waiting. That night, Elena sat on the couch scrolling through her sister's phone records, stopping at one detail that made her chest tighten. A call at 9:41 p.m. It was brief, less than 20 seconds. "Incoming, blocked number." "Did you see this?" she asked the detective the next morning, sliding the screenshot across the table. He frowned. "That's after she reached the lobby." "So she was alive?" "Yes," he said carefully. "At least, her phone was." For the first time since the report was filed, the detectives' confidence wavered. They subpoenaed the building's internal network logs. If her phone connected to Wi-Fi, even briefly, it would leave a trace. Hours later, the analyst looked up from his screen. "There's a ping," he said, "very faint, very short." "Where?" the detective asked. The analyst zoomed in. "Inside the building. Lower level. But it doesn't make sense, it's not a public access floor." The room went quiet. "That floor's restricted," the guard said slowly. "Badge access only." Elena felt her pulse in her ears. "So how did she get there?" No one answered. By the end of the second day, the narrative began to shift. This wasn't a missed bus. This wasn't a spontaneous decision to disappear. Something had interrupted her routine, something that pulled her off the expected path in the narrow window between the elevator doors opening and the night swallowing her whole. And somewhere in the building's unseen spaces, her phone had whispered a final digital breath before falling silent forever. By the third day, the investigation had begun to harden around a single uncomfortable idea. She left on her own. The phrase appeared first in hushed conversations between officers, then more confidently in briefings, and finally inevitably in the official report. Voluntary disappearance. No evidence of violence. No witnesses. No forced entry. Just a woman who, according to the data, stopped participating in her own life. The detectives laid it out carefully for the family. "High-pressure job. New city. Late night," one of them said, hands folded on the table. "We see this sometimes. People reach a breaking point." Elena stared at him. "She had dinner plans with me next week." He nodded sympathetically. "That doesn't rule anything out." But the theory began to fray the moment it was tested against the details. Her apartment told a different story. Clothes still hanging by color. Passport untouched in a drawer. A half-used planner on the kitchen table, open to the following Tuesday, with a single note written in neat handwriting. "Second meeting. Confirm time." Detectives circled that line and read. "She was planning to go back," one officer muttered. You don't plan follow-ups if you're about to vanish. They dug into the man from the networking event, the one she'd met for the first time that night. His interview was calm, almost rehearsed. "We talked for maybe 10 minutes, he said. "Exchanged cards, that's it." "Did you suggest continuing the conversation later?" a detective asked. "Sure, like everyone does." Phone records confirmed no calls between them. No texts. No messages on social media. Too clean. Then came the building access logs. Every movement in the lower levels required a badge time-stamped, logged, archived. The analyst pulled the data for the night she disappeared. "There's no record of her badge being used," he said. "So she never went downstairs," the detective concluded. The analyst hesitated. "Officially? No. Unofficially, there was a problem. At 9:47 p.m., 13 minutes after she entered the lobby, a door on the restricted level briefly unlocked. The system registered the action, but not the user. No ID attached, the analyst explained. It's rare, but it happens if the reader malfunctions or if someone uses a master override. "Who has that?" the detective asked. The analyst leaned back. "Facilities, security supervisors, a handful of executives." The voluntary disappearance theory was starting to sound less like an explanation and more like a placeholder. Elena wasn't convinced from the beginning. She hated loose ends, she said during one interview, her voice tight. She wouldn't just stop existing, not without telling someone, but without a body, without a struggle, without a single drop of blood or broken object. The case drifted toward administrative limbo. After 2 weeks, search efforts slowed. Flyers peeled off street poles, calls stopped coming in, and then, quietly, the file was marked inactive. One detective lingered over the paperwork longer than the others. He flipped through still images from the lobby camera, empty frames glowing under fluorescent lights. "She didn't walk out," he said softly to no one in particular. Another officer shrugged. "Then where'd she go?" The detective closed the folder. "That's the problem." Months passed. Seasons changed. The building continued to operate, its elevators rising and falling, its restricted floors sealed and silent. And somewhere beneath it all, the unanswered question remained, growing heavier with time. If she didn't leave the building, and she didn't choose to disappear, then who decided she should? The search began with urgency and ended with exhaustion. For the first few weeks, the city seemed to lean in. Patrol cars circled the blocks around the office building. Detectives knocked on doors, questioned janitors, delivery drivers, night shift workers, anyone who might have crossed paths with her in the narrow window when she vanished. Her face appeared on local news segments, frozen in a smiling headshot that felt painfully out of place beneath the word "missing." Elena became a familiar figure in police corridors. "I just need you to look again," she said one morning, standing across from a tired detective. "Please. The building, the cameras, something was missed." "We've reviewed everything," he replied, rubbing his eyes. "Twice." Still, she refused to stop. She printed flyers herself, taping them to lampposts and bus shelters. She organized volunteer searches, though no one could quite explain where they were searching. There was no trail, no wilderness, no last known direction of travel, just concrete, glass, and locked doors. Inside the office building, one man couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The night security guard Thomas had worked that post for nearly a decade. He knew the rhythms of the building, the way sound traveled through empty hallways, the subtle changes that came with after-hours silence. That night felt different, he told investigators. Quieter, like the building was holding its breath. They pressed him for specifics. "I heard the elevator come down," he said. "Normal." But then, nothing. No footsteps toward the exit. No door chime. Just silence. Security logs showed Thomas had completed his rounds exactly on schedule. No gaps, no anomalies. And yet, his statement lingered in the case file, underlined but unexplained. Weeks turned into months. The media moved on. Without new evidence, the department reassigned personnel. The case was quietly transferred to a long-term missing persons unit, a place where unanswered questions went to wait. Then came the change that sealed its fate. The office building was sold. New ownership meant renovations, restructuring, and most critically data migration. Old security systems were replaced, servers wiped, badge logs archived improperly, then lost. Elena learned this during a phone call that left her sitting on the floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing. "You're telling me the records are gone?" she asked. "Not gone," the administrator said carefully. "Unavailable." It felt deliberate, like a door closing. By the second year, even the detectives who once believed something darker had happened were forced to admit the truth. Without evidence, there was nowhere left to go. But Elena never stopped going back. She stood across the street from the building on anniversaries, watched people enter and leave through doors her sister never seemed to pass through. She memorized the structure, the loading bays, the service entrances, the sealed windows on the lower levels. One afternoon, Thomas approached her quietly. "I shouldn't say this," he murmured, glancing over his shoulder. "But that restricted floor? It wasn't empty back then." "Not completely." Her heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "They said it was unused, but sometimes lights would be on, late, and there were badge scans that didn't line up with the tenant list." "Did you report it?" He nodded once. Nothing came of it. 3 years after her sister vanished, the building stood empty at last, sold again, this time to a development company planning a full interior overhaul. Walls would come down, floors would be stripped. Spaces long sealed would finally be opened. Elena didn't know that yet. She only knew that the city had learned to live without her sister, and that somewhere inside a building everyone believed had given up its secrets, the truth had been waiting patiently in the dark. 3 years after she vanished, the building finally stopped, pretending nothing had happened. By then, most people had forgotten what it once was, a sleek corporate hub filled with glass-walled offices and late-night ambition. Now it stood hollow, its name stripped from the facade, windows dulled by dust and neglect. A redevelopment company had purchased the property, planning to gut it down to its bones and rebuild something new. Demolition began quietly. Contractors moved floor by floor, tearing out cubicles, ripping up carpet, breaking through drywall that hadn't been touched in decades. The work was methodical, loud, and invasive. Exactly the kind of disruption the building had never experienced while it was operational. On the third week of renovations, a janitorial subcontractor named Lewis was assigned to clear debris from the lower levels floors marked restricted on the old blueprints. They were supposed to be empty, storage, mechanical rooms, dead space. That's when he found the door. It was sealed behind a temporary wall, hastily installed and poorly documented. No signage, no handle on the outside, just a narrow gap where drywall met concrete. Luis pried it open with a crowbar. Inside was a small, windowless corridor, dusty, airless, untouched. At the far end sat a metal security door, locked. Wedged beneath it, half hidden by grime and peeling paint, was a plastic rectangle. He bent down and picked it up. A security badge. The photo was scratched but unmistakable. Her face stared back through the plastic sleeve, eyes frozen in a neutral smile meant for office hallways, not crime scenes. Her name was printed clearly beneath it. Luis stood still for a long moment before calling his supervisor. Within hours, police tape stretched across the entrance of the building. When Elena arrived, escorted past flashing lights and murmuring officers, her knees nearly buckled. She recognized the badge instantly. It had hung from her sister's bag every workday, clipped beside a lanyard Elena herself had bought her as a joke. "They found it behind a locked door," a detective explained, "on a restricted level." Elena's voice came out barely above a whisper. "But they said she was never there." The detective didn't answer. Forensic teams examined the badge carefully. The plastic was warped, scuffed, exposed to moisture, but not long enough to explain 3 years of disappearance. What mattered more was the data still stored inside the chip. When analysts pulled the access logs, the room went silent. The badge had been used multiple times. The first scan occurred the night she vanished, minutes after she was last seen in the lobby. That alone shattered the official timeline. But what followed was worse. The badge registered activity weeks later, then months, Then one final time nearly a year after she was reported missing. "That's not possible," an officer muttered. "She was declared gone." "Badges don't move themselves," the analyst replied. Even more disturbing, none of those scans appeared in the building's central access logs. The data existed only on the badge itself, like a private memory no one had thought to check. Someone had used her credentials long after she disappeared inside a building everyone believed held no answers. Elena pressed her hands to her mouth as the implications sank in. "She was here," she said, "after that night. Or at least, something using her identity was." The building that had swallowed her without a trace was no longer silent. With every broken wall and exposed hallway, it began to tell a story no one had wanted to hear. And the badge discarded, hidden, forgotten, had waited patiently in the dark, holding proof that her disappearance wasn't an ending at all. It was part of something far more deliberate. The badge changed everything, and somehow explained nothing. Detectives reopened the case within hours, pulling boxes of old reports from storage, rewatching footage they had once dismissed as empty. The building was no longer just a backdrop, it was now a suspect. Every restricted hallway, every sealed door, every missing log became a question that had been ignored for too long. Inside a temporary command room set up on the ground floor, investigators laid the evidence out across folding tables. Photos of the badge, access timestamps, old blueprints marked with handwritten notes. "She was never supposed to be on these levels," one detective said, tracing a finger across the floor plan. "No meetings, no work assignments, nothing. And yet her badge was scanned here," another replied. Again and again. They brought in former employees, facilities, staff, IT administrators, security supervisors. Most were cooperative. A few were visibly nervous. "Could someone spoof a badge?" Elena asked during one briefing, her voice steady but thin. "Yes," an analyst said, "with the right access. But you'd need internal knowledge. Someone who knew how to bypass logging systems. Someone who knew the building." Attention returned to the man from the networking event. He was interviewed again, this time under very different circumstances. The room was quiet, the air thick with implication. "I already told you everything," he said, folding his arms. "We barely spoke." "Then explain this," the detective said, sliding a photo of the badge across the table. "Used inside restricted areas long after she disappeared." The man stared at it for a fraction of a second too long. "I can't," he said finally, "because I don't know anything about it." But records showed he had temporary access to the building weeks after her disappearance, consulting work tied to infrastructure upgrades. Work that placed him near the very floors where the badge had been scanned. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. Forensics teams searched the newly exposed rooms behind the sealed corridor. They found old furniture, broken monitors. A chair bolted to the floor explained away as leftover equipment. No blood, no remains, no clear crime scene. Which, somehow, made it worse. "This place was used," one investigator said quietly, "and then cleaned." Elena walked those corridors once, escorted by officers. The air was stale, heavy with dust, and something harder to name. She stopped near the spot where the badge had been found, pressed her palm against the cold concrete wall. "She didn't disappear," Elena said. "She was erased." The badge scans suggested movement, but not freedom. Entry points without exits. Doors that opened, but never logged a return. Whatever happened to her didn't end the night she vanished. It extended into weeks, months, into a time when everyone else had stopped looking. The case never reached court. Too many gaps, too much missing data, too many people who might have known something, but not enough to say who did what or why. The building was eventually demolished, its concrete broken down and hauled away piece by piece. Whatever secrets remained inside, it were reduced to rubble. The badge was returned to Elena in a clear evidence bag. She keeps it in a drawer now, not as proof but as a reminder that systems can fail, that records can be altered, and that a person can vanish in a place designed to watch everyone if the right doors are opened and the right ones are quietly sealed behind them. Her sister's case remains officially unsolved. But the badge tells a different story, one that insists she was there. longer than anyone knew.